If I think back on this at all, there was a message. There has to be a message for all of us. We had a gang that attacked my son, used a paint roller and pushed it from one side of his head to the other.
It's a devastating situation. You have Kathy Woods' son going to the beach one night and he never makes it home.
It wasn't just something for his friends and family and people who knew him and were close to him to deal with. It was something that not only they had to face, but it was something that the community of San Clemente had to face as well.
Stephen was a person I think that most of the community could relate to. He was a high school student, he was a surfer, he grew up in this community, and I think as a result of that, most of the people were in shock when Stephen was attacked and then later died.
I think it was just incredible to all of us that it really did happen, and it happened to Steve, who we were all close to, and it was in our lives.
What basically happened on October 15th was a big group of us met at the San Clemente High football game, and about a half hour before it was over, we all decided to meet down at Calafia State Beach. Before I knew it, there was about 12 of us down at the beach, and we were all just hanging out, you know. Maybe half hour had passed. 3 people began to leave because the driver of those 2 people was going to take them home. Right before he was out of the parking lot, some more cars came down. And at first I didn't think anything of it because I thought they were with us. And then I saw them all jump out of their cars, and I saw Sterling, the driver, start talking to him. Next thing I realized, he started coming in our direction again.
We're getting all flushed out.
Oh, I'm so flustered.
Hey, you guys, there's trouble up above. We gotta get out of here now.
Come on, let's go! Right then, I had a bad feeling. I was just like, oh no. And so we all got into the car, and Casey was the driver, and I was next to Casey in the front seat, and then Steve was next to me in the passenger side, and then Jennifer and Robert were in the back seat. We started going up the hill. We were pretty much leading the pack. And Steve started to roll down the window, and I told him no. All I just remember is glass shattering. The next thing I know, after it was all over, I got my head up, and I thought everything was fine. I just thought, you know, a couple windows were broken. All of a sudden, I looked over to Steve. He had a blank expression on his face, and I felt right then something was wrong. And then I just kind of turned, and I saw it sticking out of his head. We went straight to the San Clemente Hospital, the Samaritan Hospital. And on the way there, I just remember holding him, and I kept on telling him, we're going to the hospital, everything's gonna be okay, and just to hang on. Next thing I knew, I was alone in the car with Steve holding him.
He is the head trauma surgeon here at Children's Hospital in Mission Viejo, and he talked about 17-year-old Stephen Woods, the boy who was attacked last Friday night just after a beach party in San Clemente with a group.
This is a child that went to a football game, and an hour later, his mother is notified that he may not live.
What doctors found horrified and mystified them. The metal bar of a paint roller had been thrust through the teen's skull.
You can be assured that if he does wake up, that he's not going to be the way he was before he went to that football game.
Sounded too strange to be true. So, and then we got the X-ray, and that's what told all.
the true impact was the X-ray. I was approached by one of the doctors, in fact, the head of trauma at Mission Hospital, with the idea that he wanted me to let the community know this horrible thing that had happened to my son. And he started talking about releasing the X-ray, and his idea and his goal was, we have to do something. He was fed up with treating all these stabbings and shootings that were coming into the hospital.
The release of Steve's X-ray and an emotional press conference riveted the local community. Within days, the story became national news. But what began as a mother's plea against youth violence soon became confused with other issues. Strong opinions from all sides led to finger-pointing. As controversy raged, people focused on what happened to Steve Woods. They lost sight of who he was and what was lost on that Friday night in October.
When I think about Steve, I have to begin with when he was a baby. For example, I remember a time when all of a sudden he was gone out of the house, and with him went a jar of English pickled onions. Now, why he chose English pickled onions, I'll never know. He walked across this muddy field, and he's trying to feed a horse with these pickled onions from the back end. He just decided that's what he was going to do. He was never getting into pots and pans or climbing or cupboards. It was off wandering.
He knew my parents. If he screamed, I'd be in trouble, even if I didn't do anything. So he would stand there in the hallway and give me this big smile. He's just 5 years old now, okay? Give me this huge smile and just go, ah! And sure enough, here comes my parents, and I get in trouble. He's lying through his teeth, and I get in trouble, and there's nothing I could say. I mean, I didn't do a thing, but I had those moments when I babysat him, where I told him he would pay. But he always got away with it because every time I tried to make him pay, he screamed again when my parents got home, so it was always going on like that.
He really became addicted to the skateboard. That followed on from the bicycle, and then that led into the BMX racing, which he got into at about 9 years old.
He pushed himself really hard into bike racing, and if he got second, he'd get very upset. And we'd say, wait a minute, you just raced a national with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids your age in intermediate, and you came home with a second place trophy and you're upset about it? And yeah, he used to be very hard on himself.
When Steve started school, he started in a Christian school. And at that time in his life, that ended up playing an important role.
At our school, we have a very strict standard, and Stephen liked to push the limit. In a fun way, in a challenging way. He was obedient enough, but he liked to see how far he could go.
He loved drama. He loved to act. He loved creative things. Much more so than sitting and writing reports, that's for sure.
He was very much a pleasing kind of person, and he wanted to please his mom and his sister. So his grades were important to him.
I think Steve liked school simply because it was his area where he could have fun and laugh and have a good time, and just, he had an audience. He had a class of 30 kids as his audience, and he could just entertain them all.
Steve, as a kid, became very apparent to me in kindergarten and on that he related to other kids very, very well.
I used to get all these phone calls from these little kids. I used to answer the phone, who do you want? And, no, is Steve in there? And they could hardly talk, you know, and he'd get on the phone, and it was always girls.
And Stephen had this incredible smile that once he got started with this big grin that turned into a laugh, his classmates followed right along. I mean, he was definitely a leader and a trendsetter, and he did it with his sense of humor and his smile and his attitude.
I had always wanted to move to San Clemente for about 12 or 13 years, and I discussed it with Steve, the fact of changing schools, and I suggested we drive down. And he just loved it. This is cool, Mom. This is, you know, I want to move here too.
God, there's so many things Steve liked down here in San Clemente. Things like going to the movies and how it seemed everything was close-knit down here. He got into surfing real fast and took a class. Of course, he met a lot of surfers during that.
A trail of sand, and probably anywhere from 6 to 8 surfboards were stored on my balcony every day.
We had wetsuits hanging everywhere. I mean, it was just total beach house, you know.
He liked to surf, and he liked to hang out with his friends. And basically, that's pretty much how I knew him. He was very outgoing and popular, and he was a people person.
I do distinctly remember he had a nice smile. You know, you look at him and he grinned, and you grin back automatically without thinking about it. It was just one of those people that you liked right off the bat.
I started working for Denny's as a waitress, and they needed a host or a hostess. And I recommended my brother because he was very responsible.
Quite often in the restaurant business, the younger people in high school aren't equipped to handle the pressures and stress that are put on you in a restaurant. And he was great. He handled everything. He kind of took everything in stride.
He was a host when he first started here, and he excelled so quickly that we made him into a waiter. Really good.
He was helpful, he was friendly, he always made the customer feel very welcome. But if there was a little joke or a prank of some sort played, you knew he was behind it.
What the type of tricks he would play would be is to grab a couple ice cubes and put it in your apron pocket, and you would feel it melting like about 15, 20 minutes later. And you'd think, aha, that was Steven, or that was Shelley. But, you know, whomever was working at the time. Now, if both of them were working together, it kind of got to be a little nerve-wracking because, you know, it's like sibling rivalry.
He got his sister in trouble by double sending her checks to the kitchen. He found a way to duplicate orders, and we were telling her, you know, you can't do that. You're wasting too much food. We wrote her up for it. And come to find out, it was Steve running by and hitting duplicate on the keyboard as her food was being sent to the kitchen on the computer.
You expect him to respond in a remorseful way or whatever, you know, because of what he did wrong, but he would joke about it, and not in a sassy, crass way or a disrespectful way towards you, just in a funny way.
Outside of work, Steve, I know, enjoyed his truck. He had a black old Nissan truck that he was very proud of. He worried about working enough hours to make his truck payment, so that was a big part of his life.
He more or less had his act together. He knew what he wanted to do, and he's always looking ahead into the future.
The end finally came for Steven Woods 3 weeks after the popular San Clemente 17-year-old had a metal rod shoved through his head by suspected gang members. Steven Woods died here at the Kaiser Permanente Medical Center at around 8:40 Tuesday morning. Hospital officials referred all inquiries to the Orange County Sheriff's Department, and there a spokesperson told us it was simply a matter of the teenager's body finally succumbing to the gruesome head injury. Doctors say that in recent days, Woods' condition had worsened. He remained in critical condition, in a coma, with excess fluid on the brain and a lung infection.
Parents and moms and dads always worry about how their kids are growing up. And when they reach 16, 17, they have an attitude. So you're not quite sure when you're receiving this attitude whether anything ever sank in or not. But I have had people, business owners, tell me that whenever he and his friends would arrive for food, he always seemed to stand out from the crowd. He had a respect for them, which really translates to me that I had sunk through and that he was going into adulthood with that respect for his peers.
I mean, he worked. He had goals. He was goal-oriented. He knew the importance of a good job and of an education. So I think he would have been successful.
Well, I've had conversations with Steven at the employee break table several times about his future, going to school, but then he wanted to move out and live with his buddies at the same time, and he was a little confused about which way to go, and And, you know, his mother opened a vitamin shop in town, and his sister has a daughter, and he's an uncle, so he had all these things to think about.
He never really talked about getting married or children in that sense. And yet, on the other hand, he had become almost a father confessor, I've discovered, since he passed away, that a lot of these friends said, gee, you could go to him and he'd get you all calmed down and make you see that this wasn't something to get so upset about.
He was very charismatic. He had one of those attitudes that people were drawn to.
He just had a bright future, and it was just really sad to have seen it all destroyed.
We're talking about 17-year-old Steve Woods, a senior at San Clemente High School. He's at Mission Hospital in intensive care in Mission Viejo. Now, according to police, what we suspect happened is 5 teens left the football game at San Clemente High Friday night. They headed down to Calafia State Beach. There they ran into gang members. Now,
I heard about what happened to Steve on television. It was on a Monday night newscast. I'd had my back to the TV. I was doing something, and the name came across, and I just whipped around, and there he was. There was his picture, and I was shocked. I was just kind of dumbfounded, thinking that's, you know, you're going to have to excuse me. All the kids that come through my classroom are mine. You know, they're my kids. I'm going, that's my Steve. You know, that's my Steve Woods.
I was working, and I didn't really think anything of it because things like this happen all the time. But that night when I got home, I received a phone call from a friend of mine from the class, and she said, Amy, that wasn't just any kid, that was Steve.
And I was completely shocked. I don't know, this feeling of like, just this feeling of loss, you know, thinking how could it possibly happen to a young kid who was an alumni at my school as well.
It was hard working with, you know, customers continuing to ask where he was, reading about it in the daily newspaper, on TV, the media involved. It was hitting us from all directions.
I saw him 2 days before he died. They let 4 people into the hospital, I think. And I went in there and I saw him, and it was the most devastating thing I've ever done. I held his hand, and he didn't even look like Steve anymore. He looked totally different.
You read about things that happen in the newspaper, and you see these things on the news, and you think, oh, those poor people, how sad. But when it's right there in your life and part of who you are, it propels you to get involved. We did a March Against Youth Violence, and to be with the family and to get everybody at work involved and to be passing out the flyers and all wearing the green ribbons, I think that was all of us saying, we have to do something. This is where we can start.
It shouldn't be kept a secret. I think it should be basically drawn out to the point where people will get sick of hearing it, and they don't want to hear it, and they don't want it to happen again.
We're not going to stop. We're just going to keep pushing. We're going to keep marching. We're going to keep doing all the things that you need to do to keep it out there. You know, because if you keep shoving these things under the rug, we'll be in the hospital visiting someone else.
In the days that followed the attack at Calafia State Beach, 9 youths were picked up for questioning by police. 6 were eventually charged with murder and tried as adults.
So the law states everyone is innocent until proven guilty, and that requires the DA to bring in the evidence, and 9 out of 10 times the evidence is the testimony of witnesses, and yeah, it's severely impacting not only Mrs. Woods. She has to sit in court and listen to all the testimony, all the gruesome details about the autopsy, all the crime scene photos. That definitely impacts her. But again, the kids that were there, they have to come to court for each trial. They have to be questioned about what they saw, what they heard. So in a way, these court proceedings don't help them. If anything, it brings back these bad memories. Unfortunately, that's the way the system works. We have to put on the evidence, and they have to come in and tell their story.
Of the 6 defendants charged with Steve's murder, 1 pled guilty to manslaughter, and 5 were found guilty of second-degree murder. Their sentences range from 9 years in the custody of the California Youth Authority to 26 years to life in state prison.
It's always been in the news, in another city, in another state, and to actually know that I can actually say to people, yeah, you know, one of my friends did die of teen violence.
it scares me. It scares me that it's really close. And, you know, and I wonder what they're going to do about it.
San Clemente is a nice beach town, and calm, and people spend their life saving money to buy a condo or a house down on the beach and go down there on weekends to relax. And this can happen to anybody's town.
Society in general is being impacted by increased violence. I think San Clemente is no different. I think what you're finding is that there's a stronger reaction here simply because these idyllic surroundings are not where you'd expect to see violence.
Well, I think initially you had a lot of anger. You had a lot of denial by people that it could have happened in this community, South Orange County, but specifically San Clemente.
It was real. This was real. It was in their community. This was a person they knew. And a lot of people were stunned. You could see it on their faces.
I think you had a lot of people wondering, am I going to be the next victim of a senseless act of violence? That has been changed to where we now have groups of teenagers that are coming forth and saying, you know what, I want to work to make this a better place. I want to change things. We've got 50 teenagers from the high school that have stepped forward and said, I'm willing to be a mentor for at-risk kids, to show them that you don't have to be in a gang to be accepted, that there are other things to do with your time. That's the first time that I can remember working in this community for about 15 years where we've had that group of people.
I think that the reaction that you've seen in South Orange County to youth violence is really very positive. It means that people haven't written off their communities. They are committed to solving problems. They are willing to step forward and do what it takes.
We've expanded the number of clubs on campus. Our athletic programs have grown with leaps and bounds. We have many more course offerings for our students. We also offer many after-school programs now for our middle schools as well as the elementary schools.
After-school programs where we take kids that are home alone after school and provide them with positive alternatives to hanging out on the streets or getting involved with the wrong crowds. Mentorship, connecting children that are at risk of getting involved with drugs or alcohol or gangs and connecting them with positive role models.
We've reallocated our resources and put different emphasis on different parts of our community based on what the parents, the schools, and the churches are telling us they want. So from an enforcement aspect, we've done a tremendous amount, changed a lot. From a community aspect, they've changed a lot because we have awareness programs now.
It had an impact that we responded to. There was recently an incident of a gang jump-in San Clemente, and the Sheriff's Department was alerted to that by many citizens. And I think that may not have happened a year ago. I don't know that anybody would have called. I think there was a lot of people turning their backs and looking the other way. And now when it's been publicized that, yes, we have gangs in this area and we need to do something to stop it, I think that the community has been able to accept that and say, okay, we need to do our part.
An outgrowth of the situation became very positive because students started thinking more, started talking more, started to mediate their problems more, and they also became more vocal about what's happening away from school and after school and on non-school hours.
Yesterday, the leaders in society were law enforcement officers and church leaders and government officials. Today, if we're going to solve this problem, it has to be new leaders. It has to be community members from within who honestly feel and are dedicated enough to put an effort forward to solve youth violence as it relates in their community. You solve it in your community, and you'll solve it nationally and across the states.
Well, it's like anything else. If you can't get the teenagers to buy into it, if they can't see that that's the way to go, it doesn't matter what we as adults, we as cops, we as leaders say to them. Unless we can change the way kids think and look and what they find to be acceptable behavior, we're not going to change it. If we can get kids to accept that change, we've solved the problem, or at least a good portion of the problem.
What I hope will be learned from Steve's death is that violence is completely the wrong answer.
And Steve's death, to me, was a waste. And I would hope that we would make a better effort not to waste another life.
I just look at the whole thing as there has to be a message for each and every one of us. I'm just sorry it had to be my son that had to send the message.
I miss him just being at work. He was a really great addition to our team. He was fun. He had the whole world ahead of him. He had everything going for him.
I may not have been his best friend. I may not have known him the best, but you still miss somebody like that.
Mostly I miss his smile, definitely.
He had a really welcoming and warm smile, and he gave that to everybody.
The thing I miss most about Steve is his sense of humor. He could always make somebody laugh or cheer somebody up when they're down.
His humor, I miss his humor. I miss his jokes.
His presence. It's gone. I don't think it's sunk in. But I miss him.
We lost a lot when this happened. Not only a friend, but it felt like we lost, to me, it felt like I lost a part of myself. Because that night that it happened, when I was there holding him, I tried to do as much as I could, but there wasn't really anything I could do. And I felt helpless. And it just made me lose a lot of hope, I guess you could say. Because also I had a lot of hope throughout the 3 weeks, or however long it was. I also had a lot of hope that he was gonna pull through this, and he didn't. I hope Steve's not forgotten. I hope what's happened is not forgotten.
"10 years ago, if you had or even 15 years ago, you had a son and came home and said, 'Dad, I'm having a problem with a kid my size, my age, keeps picking on me.' As a father, 15 years ago, you might have said, 'Son, I want you to go out there and you take care of it. Don't let him push you around. If you come home with a black eye, I'll be proud of you.' Today, a parent would be ignorant to say something like that because you don't know what your son's going to face. You don't know what that one individual's background is, and a parent would be wise today to teach your kids how to talk their way out of situations instead of using force or violence, because you don't know what they're going to come up against.